Sun's warm. Yeah, so this is my new apartment with me and my partner. We've just moved back from New Zealand, so back to the Gold Coast, Australia. But that's not why we're here. We're here to talk about this camera, taking photos. Okay, I had to diffuse the light. It got too hot. It was a cool idea, but I don't think it's going to work. Anyway, the reason why I clicked on this video today is because the a6600 is the best photo camera you can buy. Now that's for about like 80-85% of photographers. There's a few photographers in that 10-5% upper tier that require more high spec'd out cameras, but for the majority of us, even us professionals, we don't need these really expensive cameras. Okay, so what actually makes a good photography camera? Well, the first and foremost is autofocus. You've got to have good autofocus. You're not going to use manual focus really in photography, especially for portrait photography. You've got to have good resolution in a camera. You've got to have good raw frame rates if you're shooting, like especially for sports. It's got to have good colors and dynamic range so you can recover all your shadows and your highlights. It's got to be a fair price. We all know that. The size, you know, how often are you actually going to take it with you? And lastly, the lens options. If you can't get good sharp lenses for it, it's not a good camera. And it's also going to be very usable. I mean, it's got to have a good user menu system, function buttons, custom buttons. Autofocus on the Sony a6600 is by far one of the best cameras you can get in autofocus. They've put a really good autofocus system in a very small, compact little camera. Sony just brought out a new type of autofocus system, their top tier one, which is the A1 and the A7 IV, but that actually has some flaws. Like the one in the a6600 and like the R4 are like as good as it gets. You got the eye autofocus, so right now it's on my eye, and it's got the face tracking, and it's also got subject tracking. It's got a really, really solid autofocus system, and all the Sony lenses and all the Sigma and Tamron, they all work. They just work. The resolution on this camera is 24 megapixels. That's pretty standard across the board. Having a pretty high resolution, but not too high, is the sweet spot. I mean, you're going to get the low light capability, but you're going to be able to crop all your photos in. For large images, whether that's digital or printed images, you're not going to spot the difference. Like I've got clients, real estate clients, that they've put my images on pretty big boards, and I'm like, I don't know, because it is a crop sensor camera, and there's been no complaint. It shoots the standard 11 frames per second raw. I know the new cameras, like if you really, really need a sports photography camera, this isn't the one for you. But 11 frames per second is by far like the upper standard that you can get. And the a6600 achieves that. Straight out of camera for photos, in terms of color, it is superb. A lot of the Sony users, where they use the a7R4 or the a7 III, when they use the a6600, it's one of the biggest compliments. Straight out of camera colors are just so good for some reason. And it's got 14 stops of dynamic range, so you're going to be able to recover all your highlights and shadows within your photos when you're editing in Lightroom. The usability of this camera it's just easy. The layout is just well done. I think one thing that's missing is like a joystick for moving your focus. That's a little bit like, I wish I had that, but it's got a lot of function buttons and custom buttons I use when I switch between photo and video. And it's got a really good eye viewer. The screen on the a6600 is a little small. It's very bright. You can turn it up really bright. Like you can see it outside and stuff like that. There's no issues there. Like it's better than my iPhone. When I really want to check my exposure, I definitely use the IEF. And when I want to like view the photo afterwards to check it, because sometimes when you take the photo, you're like, oh, that's perfect exposure. And then you like look at it, you're like, oh no, like that's way blown out, or way like underexposed. Yeah, so the Sony a6600 is the most expensive APS-C camera you can actually buy. With APS-C cameras you come cheaper lenses though. Like for example, the new a7 IV is about $2,000 more expensive. It's about $2,500 USD for the latest hybrid camera. It's a really good camera, but I don't think you're going to take like better photos with that camera unless you're one of those higher tier professionals. Yeah, and like the a7 III, that takes really good photos, but that's still more expensive. That's still another like $400 more expensive. You're just not going to get better images. I mean, maybe in lower light, maybe in different scenarios, But majority of people, this camera is perfect for them. Go away, Siri. Okay, so why is having a small camera good? Well, there's a great photographer said the best camera you have is the one with you. Now, you're always going to be carrying it around because it's so small. You don't really want to have a big bulky camera. They might look cool and you might look really professional, but trust me, you're not really going to take it everywhere. The one complaint I do have about the size of the a6600 is this pinky doesn't really fit. So I bought a L plate from Small Rig that solves that problem. It just puts a little bit of metal in the bottom, but it also gives you two Swiss plates, one on the bottom and one on the side for vertical content, and it moves the cold shoe so you can actually vlog. You can have your shotgun mic to the side and see yourself vlogging. So it's a great little investment. I'll link it all below. And along with a smaller camera comes smaller lenses. I mean, you can fit all the full frame lenses onto an APS-C camera, and you can buy APS-C lenses which are much cheaper, like a quarter of the price. Okay, finally, lens options. Sony's killed it. They've let third-party manufacturers make a whole lot of lenses and they've gone ham. Like Sigma, Tamron, and Samyang have made some amazing lenses and they're super affordable, especially the Samyang ones. That's what sets Sony apart from the rest of the manufacturers. They have a huge range of lens options and they all fit all the cameras. Okay, let's talk about the elephant in the room, and that is that it is a crop sensor. So what does it actually really mean in terms of photography? Well, first of all, you're not going to get as good capabilities in low light compared to a full frame. I shoot weddings, I haven't had a problem with it. It does require a little bit more skill, I would have to say. You have to light the subject a little bit, you have to move them around, but all in all, I don't have an issue with it. It hasn't convinced me to go to full frame. Another thing that's a little bit confusing is depth. Now, with your aperture, having a stop down aperture, we're at 1.4 right now on the Sigma 16mm, which is about equivalent to a 1.4 full frame lens. But if you take side by side photos of this, you're not going to get as much depth on the APS-C, but you still get plenty of depth at 16mm at 1.4. Here's some example photos, and that's only really an issue for wider lenses. So at 16mm, which is 24mm, you still get plenty of poker. Okay, so finally, who's this actually camera for? Like I said before, this camera is for about 80-85% of photographers. Whether you're a hobbyist, you're just getting into photography and you feel yeah, I really enjoy this and I want to move forward, this is a great camera for you because you can build your lenses, and then when you move on or wherever you go, you can take them with you. Even for us professionals, I feel it's overhyped. People are overselling these cameras, they're overhyping everything. So that's my reason behind the a6600 as the best photo camera you can buy. It's still very relevant in 2020. It's still a great camera to buy. I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and if you like the video, tell me what you like below, like the video, subscribe. Really want to make YouTube kind of a good revenue stream for me, so cheers, see you later.